Imagine stepping outside with your service dog, a dog trained to literally keep you alive, and suddenly, Karen from the HOA shows up wielding a spray bottle, and not one filled with lavender mist or Windex. Nope, we're talking chemicals sprayed right in the dog's face. But the real twist? When the cops showed up, Karen thought her little HOA handbook would protect her. Spoiler alert, it didn't. This is the story of how an HOA Karen learned the hard way that federal law hits harder than any HOA fine. Let's clear something up before we dive into Karen's chaos. A service dog is not the same as your Aunt Linda's fluffy Shih Tzu in a stroller at the mall. Service dogs are working animals, trained to perform specific tasks that help people with disabilities live safely and independently. That means guiding the visually impaired, alerting to seizures, calming severe PTSD, or even retrieving life-saving medication. These animals are more than pets. They're legally recognized extensions of their handlers. Here's where the law comes in. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, service dogs are federally protected. Not state, not local, not HOA level, federally. That means no homeowners association, no condo board, and definitely no nosy neighbor named Karen gets to dictate whether they're allowed. It's black and white. Now here's the funny part. Karen thought she was enforcing HOA rules. You know, the same people who tell you your grass can only be exactly 3.5 inches tall, or that your Christmas lights must be removed by January 5th or face a fine. She saw the service dog and decided, in her infinite wisdom, that it was a threat to the community. Her solution: spray chemicals on it. That's not just mean, that's a federal crime. Because under the ADA, interfering with a service animal is basically the same as interfering with medical equipment. Imagine someone unplugging your grandma's oxygen tank because it was annoying. That's the level of stupidity we're talking about here. And let's not forget, chemical sprays can blind, burn, or even poison dogs. This wasn't a slap on the wrist moment. Karen literally endangered someone's lifeline. Which brings us to the big issue. HOA Karens think their power extends further than it actually does. Newsflash, it doesn't. Think of it this way. HOA rules are like the rules of Monopoly. Fun to enforce when you're winning, but absolutely irrelevant outside of game night. Federal law, on the other hand, is like gravity. You can pretend it doesn't exist, but the second you jump off the couch, reality smacks you in the face. And Karen? She just jumped. And if you thought spraying a dog was bad, just wait until you hear Karen's excuse when the cops showed up. Let's just say, she didn't exactly hire a lawyer for her defense speech. Okay, picture this. Cops show up, blue lights flashing, neighbors peeking through blinds like it's the neighborhood version of Netflix, and there's Karen, standing there with her little spray bottle like she just saved the community from a rabid wolf. And then she opens her mouth. You'd think her first words would be, "I'm sorry, I lost my temper." Or maybe even, "I didn't know the law." Nope, Karen went with the classic. "I was just enforcing HOA rules. Ladies and gentlemen, that's like telling the IRS, I didn't pay my taxes because my Monopoly bank didn't have enough play money." HOA rules are not laws. They're guidelines at best, suggestions at worst, and absolutely powerless when stacked against federal protections like the ADA. Now, let's break down Karen's logic or lack thereof. She claimed the dog was unapproved. In her mind, every creature in the neighborhood needed HOA blessing to exist. Birds? Better fill out Form 22B. Goldfish? Needs a permit. Service dog? Well, that's clearly an unsanctioned violation. But here's the kicker. The ADA says service dogs don't even need to be registered with an HOA. The only two questions anyone is legally allowed to ask are, is the dog a service animal required because of a disability? What task or work has the dog been trained to perform? That's it.
No paperwork. No fees.
No HOA-approved stamp of approval. Yet here was Karen, acting like she was Judge Judy with a can of Raid. And the cops? Oh, they weren't buying it. In fact, one officer told her flat out, "Ma'am, this isn't an HOA issue. It's a federal crime." I can only imagine the look on Karen's face in that moment. You know that expression when a kid realizes Santa didn't actually eat the cookies? Yeah, that Now, here's why her excuse made things worse. The second she tied her action to the HOA, she dragged the entire board into potential liability. Federal law doesn't just punish individuals. It can slap fines, lawsuits, and investigations onto organizations too. Suddenly, the HOA wasn't just dealing with overgrown lawns or mismatched shutters. They were potentially facing a federal discrimination lawsuit. This is where the humor writes itself. Karen thought she was the sheriff of suburbia, but in reality, she just handed her community a ticking legal time bomb. Imagine sitting at the next HOA board meeting. Okay, item 1. Who left their trash bins out overnight? Item 2. Karen assaulted a federally protected service animal and now we're all being sued. Any volunteers for treasurer? And here's what blows my mind. Karen's just enforcing rules excuse isn't rare. Across the country, HOAs are filled with mini-dictators who think their rulebook trumps the Constitution. They forget that federal law exists, and when they try to enforce nonsense like this, they put the entire community at risk. So let me break it down for the Karens of the world. If you're ever standing in front of a cop with a spray bottle in hand, and your excuse starts with, well, the HOA says, just stop, because the only thing that phrase is going to enforce is your path straight to court. But here's where it gets even juicier. Karen's spray bottle fiasco didn't just make her look bad. It opened the floodgates. Neighbors started coming forward with their own HOA horror stories, and suddenly this wasn't just about one dog. It was about years of unchecked power finally catching up with the board. If you thought Karen spraying chemicals on a service dog was the peak of crazy, oh no, that was just the spark. What happened next? Think of it like when one person dares to complain about a terrible boss at work. Suddenly, everyone else who's been suffering in silence finally speaks up. That's exactly what went down in this neighborhood. The moment Karen tried to cover herself with the HOA rules excuse, neighbors realized something bigger. This wasn't just Karen being Karen. This was years of unchecked HOA nonsense boiling over. Started small. One neighbor timidly raised their hand and said, you know, Karen once fined me for planting tulips instead of roses. Another chimed in, yeah, she made me repaint my fence 3 times in one summer because the shade of white wasn't approved enough. Before long, it was like a group therapy session. Everyone had their own Karen scar story. And the cops? They were just standing there like referees at a dodgeball game where suddenly the whole gym decided to join in. What started as one woman defending her service dog turned into a public airing of grievances that could have filled a Netflix documentary. Now here's the kicker. Karen's little chemical spritz didn't just expose her bad judgment. It exposed the HOA's pattern of abuse. Because once neighbors began comparing notes, the board's dirty laundry started unraveling faster than a cheap sweater. One family revealed they'd been charged $200 because their kid's bike was left on the driveway for 15 minutes. Another said they were threatened with legal action for putting up Christmas lights too early in the season. And my personal favorite? Someone got fined for having a garden gnome. Apparently, the gnome wasn't architecturally harmonious with community standards. Because yes, clearly that gnome was going to tank property values faster than a sinkhole. See the pattern? It wasn't about rules. It was about control. The HOA wasn't there to protect the neighborhood. It was acting like a petty monarchy, with Karen as its self-appointed enforcer. And here's where it gets legally fascinating. By speaking up, these neighbors were building a case, not just against Karen, but against the entire board. When residents collectively document patterns of overreach, it becomes evidence of harassment and discrimination. And once the feds were involved because of the service dog, oh, the floodgates were wide open. Imagine being on the HOA board at that moment. 1 minute, you're sipping wine at the monthly meeting arguing about lawn lengths. The next, you're Googling how to survive a federal investigation and praying your homeowner's insurance covers lawsuits. Now, let's talk energy shift. You know that feeling when you finally stand up to a bully and suddenly everyone else finds their voice too? That's what happened here. Karen went from the neighborhood's feared rule queen to the community's cautionary tale. And trust me, there's no HOA handbook that tells you how to handle that. The beauty of it all? The residents realized that the HOA only had as much power as people allowed it to have. Without compliance, without silence, those letters and fines suddenly weren't so scary. It was like Dorothy pulling back the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. Turns out the all-powerful HOA was just a group of neighbors with clipboards and way too much free time. And here's the hilarious irony. Karen thought she was protecting property values by going after a service dog. Instead, she tanked the board's credibility, united the neighborhood against them, and possibly exposed years of unlawful practices to investigators. Talk about playing yourself. But if you think Karen's neighborhood revolt was bad, wait until you hear what happened when the media got involved. Because nothing terrifies an HOA more than seeing their name plastered across headlines. Especially when it involves federal crimes, service animals, and a Karen with a spray bottle. Alright, picture this. Karen thought she could bully a service dog, wave around her HOA badge of honor, and get away with it. But then something happened that no HOA fears more than a late mortgage payment. The media showed up. Yep. Within days of the chemical spray fiasco, the story hit local news. First, a tiny community bulletin. Dispute over service dog sparks controversy in HOA. But like any good story featuring a Karen, it snowballed. Local TV stations picked it up. Then Facebook neighborhood groups grabbed it. And you know what happens once Facebook gets hold of a Karen versus service dog headline? Boom, viral outrage. Suddenly, Karen wasn't just the tyrant of one gated community. She was America's latest cautionary tale. Now, here's where it gets delicious. The HOA board, which usually loved sending out newsletters bragging about their community standards, suddenly wanted no attention at all. They practically went into witness protection mode. Emails stopped. Phone calls went unanswered. And those smug board members who once nitpicked over mailbox paint colors? Silent. Dead silent. Meanwhile, the reporters didn't just stop at Karen Spray's dog. They started digging. And oh boy, once journalists get curious, HOA skeletons start falling out of the closet like it's Halloween night. They uncovered years of questionable fines. They highlighted complaints that had been ignored. And this is where it stings. They interviewed residents who'd moved out because the HOA had made their lives unbearable. Karen's little spray bottle incident opened the floodgates, and suddenly, the HOA's reputation was being dismantled on live TV. And let's not forget, this wasn't just some tabloid fluff piece. Because of the federal law violations, national outlets picked it up. Headlines like, HOA under fire after resident's service dog attacked, or neighborhood board faces federal scrutiny over ADA rights started circulating. That's when the board realized this wasn't just bad press. This was potentially career-ending, lawsuit-level exposure. Imagine Karen sitting at home, watching herself on the evening news, trying to explain to her husband why strangers online were calling her the service dog sprayer of suburbia. That's not a reputation you wash off easily. Not even with all the bleach she probably keeps under her sink. Here's the funny part. The HOA had always relied on fear to keep people quiet. Letters, fines, threats of legal action. But once the media got involved, the power dynamic flipped. Suddenly, the residents weren't scared of the HOA anymore. The HOA was terrified of the residents. Because each angry homeowner with a story was now a potential interview. Each fine letter could become Exhibit A in the court of public opinion. And the neighbors? Oh, they had time. One resident even started a change.org petition demanding the board step down. It got hundreds of signatures in days. Another organized a town hall in the community clubhouse, normally used for boring HOA budget meetings, now filled with residents waving copies of their fines like protest signs. The energy had shifted. Karen wasn't just a neighborhood nuisance anymore. She was a catalyst. She had accidentally united an entire community against the board. And that's something no HOA is prepared for, because divided, they thrive. United, they crumble. Now, legally, this is where things really heated up. With the ADA violation already in motion, the press attention meant regulators couldn't ignore it. Local officials started asking questions. Lawyers sniffed opportunity. And when lawyers smell blood, it's only a matter of time before lawsuits pile higher than HOA meeting minutes. The HOA's defense? They tried the classic, "we had no idea, this was one rogue member" routine. But residents were quick to remind everyone that Karen had been enforcing rules with the board's blessing for years. And if the board was going to throw her under the bus, well, she might just spill every HOA secret she knew. Spoiler, she did. But if you think news headlines and community revolts were the end of Karen's downfall, think again. Because when the legal system stepped in, this HOA discovered what real accountability looks like. And spoiler alert, it's a lot scarier than an angry neighborhood Facebook group. If you've ever seen an HOA panic, you know it's like watching ants when someone kicks their little hill. Total chaos. And when the legal system stepped in after Karen's chemical spray stunt, it wasn't just chaos. It was nuclear meltdown. See, the Americans with Disabilities Act ADA is no joke. Violating a disabled person's rights, especially when it involves a service animal, is basically the legal equivalent of sticking your hand in a beehive and hoping not to get stung. Spoiler, you're gonna get stung. Hard. Within weeks, federal investigators were circling. Lawyers representing the dog's owner filed a complaint citing ADA violations, intentional emotional distress, and property damage. The HOA tried its classic defense playbook. "We'll handle this internally." But newsflash. Spraying chemicals on a federally protected service animal isn't something you sweep under the rug with a strongly worded letter. Now here's where it gets spicy. Karen didn't just break the law. By acting as a pseudo-HOA cop, she made the board complicit. Because the question became, did the HOA know she was doing this? Did they empower her? And oh boy, the evidence started piling up. Emails surfaced showing Karen bragging about enforcing the rules. Neighbors produced texts where she boasted about being the HOA's eyes and ears. And in one board meeting transcript, she was literally thanked for keeping standards high. Translation: the HOA had basically deputized a suburban vigilante, and now they were going to pay for it. The lawsuit grew teeth fast. Damages weren't just about vet bills for the dog, though those alone weren't cheap. They included emotional suffering, violation of federal rights, and punitive damages for reckless disregard of the law. In plain English, this wasn't going to be a slap on the wrist. It was going to be a financial beatdown. And here's where the comedy writes itself. The same HOA that once fined people $50 for leaving a trash bin out overnight was now staring down fines in the tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars. Talk about karma with a megaphone. Meanwhile, Karen herself wasn't spared. Her name was on that police report, and prosecutors weren't about to let it slide. She faced potential criminal charges for animal cruelty and assault on a service dog, which, in case you didn't know, is a federal crime. Yeah, that's right. She went from neighborhood enforcer to possible federal defendant in record time. The fallout was brutal. Insurance companies, who usually cover HOAs in legal scrapes, started backing away. Why? Because intentional violations of federal law don't exactly look like, oops, an accident. The board members started resigning one by one, hoping to avoid being personally dragged into the mess. And residents? They were watching gleefully, popcorn in hand, as the same people who had terrorized them with fines and letters were now lawyering up like contestants in a bad courtroom drama. The cherry on top? The federal investigators didn't stop at just Karen. They started auditing the HOA's entire operation. Were rules being enforced equally? Were fines discriminatory? Were residents' complaints ignored? Suddenly, this HOA wasn't just in trouble for one rogue member. They were facing scrutiny for their entire history. And let's be real. Once the feds come in, it's game over. You can't delay the hearing or push back the vote when Uncle Sam is knocking on your door with a file full of ADA violations. Karen, of course, tried to plead ignorance. "I didn't know it was against the law," she whined. But ignorance doesn't hold up in court, especially when there are literal federal posters in every public building that say, "Do not interfere with service animals." Like, come on, Karen, even airport bathrooms have that sign. The end result? The HOA faced massive legal bills. Karen's reputation was scorched earth, and the once feared board was dismantled under public pressure and legal consequences. The neighborhood, once bullied into silence, was now louder than ever, organizing, voting, and even campaigning for the abolition of the HOA itself. And that, folks, is how one Karen, one spray bottle, and one brave service dog brought an entire HOA to its knees. If you think this story is wild, remember, it's not just about one neighborhood. Cases like this are popping up all over America, and they're changing how we think about HOAs forever. So, what would you have done if it were your dog? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe for more HOA wars, because trust me, we're just getting started. And that, folks, is how one Karen, one spray bottle, and one brave service dog brought an entire HOA to its knees. If you think this story is wild, remember, it's not just about one neighborhood. Cases like this are popping up all over America, and they're changing how we think about HOAs forever. So, what would you have done if it were your dog? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe for more HOA wars, because trust me, we're just getting started.